I learned the hard way that moving to Pine Ridge, Colorado would be the worst decision of my life when I got fined $300 for shoveling snow at 5:30 in the morning. Let me back up a bit. My name is Zachary Brennan, and I moved to this supposedly peaceful mountain community 6 months ago after landing a remote job with a tech company. The houses were beautiful, the views were incredible, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. What I didn't realize was that the Homeowners Association was run by a woman named Patricia Henderson, who treated the HOA bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments handed down from above. Patricia was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the word Karen. She was 52 years old, always wore her blonde hair in that speak to the manager style, and drove a white BMW with a bumper sticker that said HOA Board President, like it was something to be proud of. She lived in the biggest house at the end of Maple Drive, right where the main road connected to the highway. Her property sat at a choke point where everyone had to pass to get in or out of our little subdivision. The first time I met her was 3 days after I moved in. I was unloading boxes from my truck when she pulled up in that BMW, rolled down her window, and immediately started telling me that my truck was parked at an angle that violated Section 12.4 of the HOA regulations. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I adjusted it anyway just to avoid conflict. That was my first mistake. Appeasing Patricia only made her more aggressive. Over the next few months, I got written up for having my garbage cans visible from the street after 7 a.m. on trash day, for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list, and for having a welcome mat that was apparently the wrong shade of brown. Each violation came with a $50 fine that I had to pay within 30 days or face additional penalties. I tried to follow the rules. I really did. I read through the entire 78-page HOA handbook and did my best to comply with every ridiculous regulation. But Patricia always found something. She would drive through the neighborhood 3 times a day looking for violations, and I swear she had it out for me specifically. Then winter came. Colorado winters are no joke, and Pine Ridge sits at an elevation where we get absolutely dumped on with snow. The first major storm hit in mid-December, dropping 18 inches overnight. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning because I had an important video conference at 8 a.m., and I needed to make sure my driveway was clear in case I needed to run to the office supply store for a replacement webcam. Mine had been acting up and I wanted a backup plan. I bundled up in my heavy coat, pulled on my boots, and headed outside with my snow shovel. The street was completely quiet. Every house was dark except for a few porch lights. The snow was still falling lightly, and my breath made clouds in the freezing air. I started clearing my driveway, working quickly because it was cold enough to freeze exposed skin. I was about halfway done when I heard a door slam. I looked up to see Patricia marching down the street in her bathrobe and duck boots, her face already red with anger. "Excuse me," she shouted from 3 houses away. "Excuse me, Zachary." I stopped shoveling and leaned on my shovel, watching her approach. My gut told me this wasn't going to be pleasant. "You have any idea what time it is?" she demanded when she got close enough to speak at a normal volume. I pulled out my phone and checked. "It's 5:40 now. I started around 5:30. "Exactly," she said, crossing her arms. Section 23.7 of the HOA regulations clearly states that no excessive noise is permitted before 7 a.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. on weekends. That includes snow removal. I stared at her. "You're joking." "I don't joke about HOA regulations, Zachary." The sound of shoveling woke me up. "You're in violation and you'll be receiving a fine." "Patricia, I have to clear my driveway. I have work this morning and I need to make sure I can get out if necessary." "Then you should have done it after 7 a.m. like everyone else," she said. Rules are rules. This is insane. Nobody else is even awake. How can I be disturbing anyone? I was awake, and I'm sure the sound was carrying to other houses as well. "You'll be receiving a $300 fine for the violation. Consider this your official warning." She turned and marched back to her house before I could respond. I stood there in the falling snow, absolutely stunned. $300 for shoveling my own driveway. This was beyond ridiculous. But I paid the fine when I got the official notice 3 days later. I didn't want to deal with the escalating penalties, and I figured I'd just set my alarm earlier next time to shovel before the noise ordinance kicked in. Wait, that didn't make sense. If I couldn't shovel before 7 a.m., then I couldn't shovel earlier. I just have to wait until after 7. The problem was that my work schedule didn't always align with Patricia's arbitrary rules. I brought it up at the next HOA meeting in January, thinking surely the other board members would see how ridiculous this was. I was wrong. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the entrance of the subdivision. There were about 20 homeowners present, plus the 5 board members. Patricia sat in the middle as president, flanked by her allies. Margaret Chen, the vice president, and Robert Foster, the treasurer. The other 2 board members, Linda Martinez and James Wright, seemed more reasonable but rarely spoke up against Patricia. When the floor opened for homeowner concerns, I raised my hand. "Yes, Zachary," Patricia said with barely concealed irritation. "I wanted to discuss the noise ordinance as it relates to snow removal," I said, standing up. "I think there should be an exception that allows homeowners to clear their driveways before 7 a.m. if they have work obligations. 18 inches of snow doesn't care about our schedule, and sometimes we need to leave early. The noise ordinance exists to ensure all residents can enjoy peace and quiet during early morning hours," Patricia replied immediately. "If we make exceptions for one person, everyone will want exceptions." "But it's a safety issue," I argued. "If someone has a medical emergency or needs to get to work, they should be able to clear their driveway." Medical emergencies are different. That would fall under Section 31.2, emergency provisions. As for work, that's a personal scheduling issue. You can clear your driveway after 7 a.m. or the night before. The snow was still falling heavily at midnight when I went to bed. If I'd cleared it then, it would have been covered again by morning. "Then you clear it again after 7 a.m., Patricia said with finality. "I'm not going to debate this further. The rules are clear." Margaret nodded in agreement. "We can't have everyone making noise at all hours because it's convenient for them. That's why we have these regulations." I looked around the room, hoping some other homeowners would back me up. A few people avoided eye contact. One older gentleman, Frank, who lived 2 doors down from me, spoke up. "I think Zachary has a point," Frank said. "These mountain storms can be unpredictable. A little flexibility would make sense." "Noted," Patricia said dismissively. "Anything else?" The meeting moved on to other topics, and my concern was effectively ignored. I left feeling frustrated and defeated. $300 for shoveling snow at 5:30 in the morning. It was theft masquerading as community standards. 2 weeks later, the weather forecast predicted another massive storm. This one was supposed to be even bigger than the December storm, with accumulations between 24 and 30 inches. The forecast had been consistent for 3 days, and everyone in the neighborhood was preparing. I watched the forecast obsessively. The storm was set to start Tuesday evening and continue through Wednesday afternoon. I had a critical client presentation on Thursday morning that I absolutely could not miss. It was a video call, so I didn't need to leave the house, but I wanted to make sure I had options in case my internet went down or I needed to get to somewhere with better connectivity. Tuesday evening arrived, and the snow started falling around 6 p.m. By the time I went to bed at 11, there was already 8 inches on the ground, and it was coming down so hard I could barely see across the street. I set my alarm for 6:55 a.m. I'd wait until 7 on the dot to start shoveling, following Patricia's precious rules to the letter. But when I woke up Wednesday morning and looked outside, my stomach dropped. There had to be at least 26 inches of snow, maybe more in the drifts. My driveway was completely buried. The street was impassable. Snow was still falling steadily. I got dressed and headed outside at exactly 7 a.m. The cold hit me like a wall. It had to be around 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind was brutal. I started shoveling, but after 10 minutes, I realized this was going to take hours. The snow was heavy and wet, perfect for building snowmen but terrible for shoveling. My back was already aching, and I'd barely made a dent. That's when I noticed Patricia's BMW trying to navigate the unplowed street. She lived at the end of the road where it connected to the highway, and she was apparently trying to leave. But the street was completely impassable. Her BMW was fishtailing, the rear end sliding around as she tried to push through the deep snow. I kept shoveling my driveway, watching out of the corner of my eye as she finally gave up and reversed back to her house. A few minutes later, she came walking up the street, bundled in an expensive-looking winter coat. "Zachary," she called out, "why isn't your driveway cleared yet?" I stopped and stared at her. "Because there's 26 inches of snow and I've only been out here for 15 minutes. I couldn't start before 7 a.m., remember? Don't be smart with me. Some of us have places to be. So do I. That's why I'm shoveling." "Well, you need to shovel faster." "The street is impassable." "Then call the county snowplow." "The street isn't my responsibility." "The county won't prioritize our subdivision. You know that. We all need to do our part to keep the roads clear." I leaned on my shovel. "My part is my driveway. That's it. And I'm doing that after 7 a.m., exactly as you demanded." Her face was turning red again. "I have an appointment at 9:30 in Denver. I need to get out of here." "Then you should have left earlier," I said, throwing her own logic back at her. "Maybe around 5:30 this morning when I wanted to shovel. That's different. I needed to sleep. And I needed to not get fined $300. We stared at each other for a long moment. The snow continued to fall around us, and the wind picked up, sending a spray of powder across the street. "This is ridiculous," Patricia finally said. "I'm going to call an emergency HOA meeting about this." "You do that," I said, and went back to shoveling. She stormed off, struggling through the deep snow. I watched her go, feeling a mix of satisfaction and petty vindication. Maybe now she'd understand how ridiculous her rules were. I spent the next 3 hours clearing my driveway. By the time I finished, my arms felt like rubber and my back was screaming. I went inside, took a hot shower, and prepared for my client presentation. The internet held up, and the presentation went perfectly. By Thursday afternoon, the snow had stopped and the sun had come out. That's when things got interesting. The county snowplows had cleared the main highways, but our subdivision was low priority. The only way in or out was through the road that passed by Patricia's house, and that road was completely blocked by snow. The county had actually plowed the highway, but in doing so, they'd pushed a massive wall of snow right across our access point. It was at least 5 feet high and stretched about 20 feet across. A few neighbors with trucks and SUVs tried to push through, but even they couldn't make it. We were effectively snowed in. Thursday evening, Patricia sent out an email to all homeowners. The The subject line was Emergency Neighborhood Snow Removal. The email explained that we were cut off from the highway and needed volunteers to help clear the access road. She was organizing a group effort for Friday morning at 8 a.m. I deleted the email. Friday morning came, and I watched from my window as about 10 neighbors gathered at the access point with shovels. Patricia was directing them like a general commanding troops. They started working on the snow wall, but it was slow going. That wall was massive, and the temperature had dropped overnight, turning the top layer into ice. My phone rang. It was Patricia. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I ignored it again. Then she started texting me. "Zachary, where are you? We need all hands on deck. This is a community effort. Everyone needs to participate. I'm coming to your house if you don't respond." I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, there was aggressive knocking on my door. I walked over and opened it to find Patricia standing there, red-faced and angry. "Why aren't you helping?" she demanded. "I'm busy," I said calmly. "Busy? We're all trapped here. This is an emergency." "Sounds like a community problem," I said. "I've got my own driveway to worry about." "Your driveway is already clear. We need you to help with the access road." "Is the access road my responsibility according to the HOA bylaws?" She hesitated. "It's everyone's responsibility to maintain common areas. The access road isn't a common area. It's a public street maintained by the county, and even if it were, I'm not obligated to provide manual labor. That's not in the bylaws. This is about being a good neighbor, Zachary. Like you were a good neighbor when you fined me $300 for shoveling at 5:30 in the morning. Like you were a good neighbor when you dismissed my concerns at the HOA meeting. That's completely different." "No, it's not. You made it clear that rules are rules, and everyone has to follow them no matter how inconvenient." "Well, I'm following the rules. There's no bylaw that says I have to help clear the access road. You're being petty and childish." "I'm being exactly as rigid and inflexible as you taught me to be, Patricia. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I closed the door in her face. She pounded on it a few more times, but I didn't respond. Eventually, she left. I felt a little guilty, I'll admit. There were other neighbors trapped here too, not just Patricia. But the righteous anger burning in my chest overrode the guilt. She had made my life hell over the past 6 months with her arbitrary enforcement of ridiculous rules. Now she could live with the consequences. The group worked all morning Friday, but by lunchtime they'd only cleared about half of the snow wall. A few people had to give up because of exhaustion or back pain. Patricia kept calling and texting me, alternating between demanding I help and trying to guilt-trip me about being a bad neighbor. I didn't respond to any of it. Friday afternoon, I got a text from Frank, the older gentleman who'd backed me up at the HOA meeting. "Hey, Zachary, I understand why you're upset with Patricia, but some of us really need to get out. I have a doctor's appointment Monday that I can't miss. Could you please help?" That message hit different. Frank was a good guy, and he wasn't responsible for Patricia's behavior. I thought about it for a while, wrestling with my conscience. Part of me wanted to help Frank and the other reasonable neighbors. But another part of me knew that if I gave in now, Patricia would learn nothing from this experience. I texted Frank back. "I'm sorry about your appointment. Have you tried calling the county to get them to prioritize plowing our access road?" Patricia called them. "They said they'll get to it when they can, but it might be several days." "What about calling a private snow removal company?" "Patricia's looking into it, but most of them are booked solid with the storm cleanup." I felt bad for Frank, but I still didn't go help. Instead, I spent Friday afternoon doing research. I pulled up the HOA bylaws and started reading through them carefully, looking for anything I could use. That's when I found something interesting. Section 41.6 stated that the HOA board was responsible for ensuring reasonable access to and from the community for all residents. It went on to say that the board must take appropriate action to address any access issues within 48 hours of being notified. The access road had been blocked for over 24 hours now. If they didn't resolve it within another 24 hours, they'd be in violation of their own bylaws. I also found Section 18.3, which stated that any HOA board member who fails to fulfill their duties as outlined in these bylaws could be subject to removal through a vote of the homeowners. This was getting good. I drafted an email and sent it to the entire neighborhood, copying what Patricia had done with her emergency email. Dear neighbors, I want to bring to your attention that we have been without access to the main highway for over 24 hours. According to Section 41.6 of our HOA bylaws, the board is responsible for ensuring reasonable access to and from the community, and must take appropriate action within 48 hours. I encourage everyone to document this access issue and the timeline. If the board fails to resolve this within the required time frame, we may need to consider whether our current leadership is fulfilling their duties as outlined in the bylaws. Best regards, Zachary Brennan. I hit send and sat back. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with responses. Some people were supportive. Others accused me of being petty and making a bad situation worse. But several people, including Frank, pointed out that I was technically correct about the bylaws. Patricia called me immediately. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened to the message afterward. Zachary, you are way out of line, her voice screeched through the phone. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this is serious. People need to get out of here, and you're sitting in your house sending inflammatory emails instead of helping. This is harassment, and I will not tolerate it. You'll be hearing from the HOA board about this. I saved the voicemail, just in case. Saturday morning arrived and the access road was still blocked. The 48-hour deadline was approaching fast, set to expire Saturday evening. I watched from my window as Patricia and a smaller group of neighbors continued to work on the snow wall. They were making progress, but it was clear they wouldn't finish in time without more help or heavy equipment. Around noon, I saw a private snow removal truck pull up. Patricia must have found a company with availability. The truck had a plow on the front and started pushing through the remaining snow. Within an hour, they'd cleared enough of a path for cars to get through. The driver charged Patricia $800, which I know because she sent out another neighborhood email complaining about the cost and demanding that everyone chip in to reimburse her. I didn't chip in. That evening, I got an official notice from the HOA. It was a fine for $500 for failure to participate in mandatory community service and harassment of HOA board members. I'd been expecting something like this, so I wasn't surprised. What Patricia didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything meticulously. Every email, every text message, every fine, every interaction. I had timestamps, screenshots, and even recordings of our conversations. Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording, so I was legally covered. I wrote a formal response to the HOA board, citing specific sections of the bylaws that Patricia had violated. I pointed out that there was no provision for mandatory community service anywhere in the 78-page handbook. I noted that her fines were becoming retaliatory and constituted harassment under Colorado law, and I demanded that all fines issued to me in the past 6 months be reviewed by an independent third party. I sent copies to all 5 board members and copied the entire neighborhood. That's when things really escalated. Monday morning, I got a certified letter from a lawyer representing the HOA. It demanded that I pay all outstanding fines immediately or face legal action. The total was now $1,050 when including the various fines from the past months. I called the lawyer's office and scheduled a meeting for Wednesday. The lawyer's name was Richard Matthews, and his office was in Colorado Springs, about 40 minutes from Pine Ridge. I drove down Wednesday morning with a thick folder of documentation. Matthews was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a professional demeanor. He gestured for me to sit down in his office. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming in. I represent the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. As you know, you have outstanding fines totaling $1,050. The HOA board would like to resolve this matter without going to court." "I'm not paying those fines," I said calmly. "They're illegitimate and retaliatory. The HOA board has the authority to issue fines for bylaw violations. You signed an agreement acknowledging this when you purchased your home. I understand that, but the fines have to be legitimate. Let me show you something." I opened my folder and pulled out the documentation I'd prepared. I showed him the timeline of fines, starting with the garbage cans and progressing through the flowers, the welcome mat, and the snow shoveling incident. I showed him the emails, the text messages, and Patricia's voicemail threatening me. "This is a pattern of harassment," I explained. "Patricia Henderson has been targeting me since I moved in. The snow shoveling fine was particularly egregious. $300 for clearing my driveway at 5:30 in the morning when I had work obligations. And then, when the neighborhood was snowed in, she tried to fine me for not participating in mandatory community service which doesn't exist in the bylaws." Matthews listened carefully, reviewing my documents. His expression remained neutral, but I could see his eyes narrowing as he read through everything. "And there's more," I continued. "The HOA board violated their own bylaws by failing to ensure reasonable access within 48 hours, as required by Section 41.6. Patricia Henderson called me repeatedly, sent harassing text messages, and showed up at my door demanding I provide manual labor. This is not how an HOA board is supposed to operate." Matthews set down the papers and looked at me. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm required to represent the HOA because they've retained my services, but some of what you're showing me is concerning. Have you considered filing a complaint with the HOA board to dispute these fines through the proper channels?" I tried that at the January meeting. Patricia dismissed my concerns without discussion. The board backed her up. "There should be a formal dispute process outlined in the bylaws. Have you followed that?" I started the process with my response letter last week. "But given that Patricia controls the board, I don't expect a fair hearing." Matthews nodded slowly. "I need to review these documents more carefully and discuss them with my client. In the meantime, I'd recommend you continue documenting everything and following the formal dispute process. If the HOA board doesn't address your concerns appropriately, you may have grounds for a counterclaim." "A counterclaim for what?" "Harassment, selective enforcement of bylaws, and potential breach of fiduciary duty." HOA board members have a legal obligation to act in the best interests of all homeowners, not to target specific individuals. That was interesting. I thanked Matthews for his time and left his office feeling slightly more optimistic. At least he seemed to recognize that Patricia's behavior was problematic. Over the next 2 weeks, I followed the formal dispute process outlined in the bylaws. I submitted written complaints about each fine, providing detailed explanations and supporting documentation. The bylaws required the board to hold a hearing within 30 days to review the disputed fines. The hearing was scheduled for late February in the community center. All 5 board members would be present, and I was allowed to present my case. Other homeowners could attend as observers. I prepared meticulously for the hearing. I organized all my documentation into a clear presentation, created a timeline of events, and even consulted with my own lawyer to make sure I was handling everything correctly. The night of the hearing arrived. The community center was packed with at least 40 homeowners, far more than usually attended HOA meetings. Word had spread about the conflict between Patricia and me, and apparently people were interested in seeing how it would play out. I sat at a small table facing the board members. Patricia was in the center, looking stern and official. Margaret and Robert flanked her, while Linda and James sat on the ends looking uncomfortable. Patricia called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to review the disputed fines issued to Zachary Brennan. Mr. Brennan, you have 30 minutes to present your case." I stood up and took a deep breath. "Thank you. I'm here tonight because I believe the fines issued to me over the past 6 months are illegitimate and retaliatory. Let me walk you through the timeline." I started with the first fine for the angled truck, explaining how I was new to the neighborhood and didn't even know I was in violation. I showed photos demonstrating that other trucks in the neighborhood were parked at similar angles but hadn't been fined. Then I moved through the garbage cans, the flowers, and the welcome mat. For each one, I showed evidence that other homeowners had similar or identical situations but weren't fined. I had photos of at least 3 other houses with garbage cans visible after 7 a.m., 2 houses with the same flowers I'd planted, and 5 houses with welcome mats in various shades of brown. "This demonstrates selective enforcement," I explained. "The bylaws are being applied to me but not to other homeowners. That's not fair or legal." Patricia tried to interrupt, but Linda, one of the quieter board members, held up her hand. "Let him finish, Patricia. He has the floor." I continued with the snow shoveling incident, playing the audio recording of Patricia confronting me at 5:40 a.m. Hearing her angry voice echo through the community center was powerful. Several homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. $300 for shoveling my driveway before work. And then, when we were all snowed in later that month, I was fined again for not participating in mandatory community service, which doesn't exist anywhere in our bylaws. I pulled up the relevant bylaw sections on my laptop, projecting them onto the wall so everyone could see. Section 41.6 clearly states that the HOA board is responsible for ensuring reasonable access within 48 hours. The board failed to do this. Instead, Patricia demanded that I provide free manual labor, and when I refused, she retaliated with another fine. The room was completely silent except for my voice. I could see Patricia's face getting redder by the second. Finally, I want to address the harassment. I have documented over 30 phone calls, 50 text messages, and multiple in-person confrontations from Patricia Henderson over the past 6 months. This is not professional behavior. This is not how an HOA president should treat homeowners. I played Patricia's voicemail from the snow incident, the one where she'd called me out of line and threatened me with consequences. The hostile tone was unmistakable. In conclusion, I'm requesting that all fines be vacated and that the board implements a clear policy for fair and consistent enforcement of bylaws. I'm also requesting that Patricia Henderson issue a formal apology for her harassment. Thank you. I sat down. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. Patricia banged her gavel, trying to restore order. "That's enough," she snapped. The board will now deliberate. We'll take a 15-minute recess. The 5 board members huddled in the corner, speaking in low voices. I could see it was a heated discussion. Linda and James seemed to be arguing with Patricia while Margaret and Robert backed her up. Frank came over to me during the recess. "That was well done, Zachary. You made your case clear." "Thanks. I just hope they listen." "Patricia won't like it, but I think you've got Linda and James on your side. That might be enough." The 15 minutes stretched to 30, then 40. Finally, the board members returned to their seats. Patricia looked furious, but Linda was the one who spoke. "After reviewing the evidence presented by Mr. Brennan, the board has voted to vacate the fines related to the snow shoveling incident and the mandatory community service. However, the fines for the garbage cans, flowers, and welcome mat will stand as those represent legitimate bylaw violations." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was something. I'd gotten back $650 of the fines. Additionally, Linda continued, the board recognizes that there may have been inconsistent enforcement of certain bylaws. Going forward, we'll be implementing a more systematic approach to ensure all homeowners are treated equally. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode, but she kept her mouth shut. James spoke next. "We also want to acknowledge that the situation during the snow emergency could have been handled better. The board will be reviewing our protocols for weather-related access issues to ensure we're in compliance with Section 41.6. That was an admission of failure, even if they didn't say it directly. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Several homeowners came up to congratulate me or thank me for standing up to Patricia. A few others gave me dirty looks, probably friends of Patricia's who thought I'd caused trouble. Frank pulled me aside as I was leaving. "You did good tonight, Zachary, but watch your back. Patricia doesn't forget things like this." He was right to warn me. Over the next month, Patricia became even more aggressive in her enforcement of HOA rules. She wasn't targeting just me anymore, though. She was going after everyone, trying to prove that she wasn't playing favorites. Suddenly, half the neighborhood was getting fined for minor violations. People who'd had their garbage cans out late for years were getting $50 fines. The guy who'd been parking his boat in his driveway every summer got a $200 citation. The neighborhood was in an uproar. The monthly HOA meeting in March was packed with angry homeowners demanding answers. Patricia tried to maintain control, insisting she was just enforcing the bylaws fairly, but people weren't buying it. That's when Linda Martinez made her move. "I'd like to make a motion," Linda announced during the meeting. "I move that we put Patricia Henderson's position as HOA president to a vote of no confidence." The room went dead silent. This was huge. A vote of no confidence could remove Patricia from her position. Patricia's face went white, then red. "That's out of order. You can't just call for a vote like that." "Actually, I can," Linda said calmly. Section 18.3 allows any board member to call for a no-confidence vote if they believe another board member has failed to fulfill their duties. "I believe Patricia has abused her authority, harassed homeowners, and created a hostile environment in our community." "I second the motion," James said immediately. The room erupted in noise. Some people were cheering, others were arguing. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, but nobody was paying attention. It took 10 minutes to restore order. Once everyone calmed down, Linda explained the process. A no-confidence vote required a majority of homeowners to vote in favor. They'd hold a special election in 2 weeks, giving everyone time to consider their decision. Patricia was livid. "This is a personal attack. Linda, you've always been jealous of my leadership. And Zachary, I know you're behind this. You've been poisoning people against me since you moved here." "I didn't plan this," I said honestly, "but I support it." The next 2 weeks were intense. The neighborhood split into factions. Patricia's supporters painted her as a dedicated leader who was just trying to maintain property values and community standards. Linda's supporters portrayed her as the reasonable alternative who would bring fairness and common sense to the HOA board. I stayed mostly neutral publicly, but privately I voted against Patricia when the special election came around. The results were announced at a special meeting in early April. Out of 73 homeowners in our subdivision, 61 voted. Patricia lost the no-confidence vote 37-24. She was removed as HOA president effective immediately. Linda Martinez was elected as the new president by a vote of 41-20. Patricia stood up during the meeting, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. "You people have made a huge mistake. This neighborhood is going to fall apart without proper leadership. Property values will plummet. You'll all regret this." She stormed out of the community center and didn't come back. Linda took over as president and immediately started making changes. She formed a committee to review all HOA bylaws and identify which ones were outdated or unnecessarily restrictive. The noise ordinance for snow removal was amended to allow essential snow clearing starting at 6 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. The list of approved flowers was expanded. Several other minor rules were relaxed or eliminated. The neighborhood felt different almost immediately. People were friendlier. There was less tension. The HOA meetings became productive discussions instead of Patricia's one-woman show. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 months later, in June, I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. "Zachary Brennan." One of them asked. "Yes, that's me. Is something wrong? We need to ask you some questions about Patricia Henderson. May we come in?" I let them in, confused and concerned. We sat in my living room and the officers introduced themselves as Detective Sarah Mills and Officer Tom Crawford. "Mr. Brennan, are you aware that Patricia Henderson has been embezzling money from the HOA?" Detective Mills asked. I stared at her. "What?" During a routine audit after her removal as president, the new board discovered some financial irregularities. It appears that Mrs. Henderson has been stealing from the HOA funds for at least 2 years. We're talking about significant amounts, over $40,000. I was stunned. I had no idea. We're interviewing all the homeowners to see if anyone noticed anything suspicious. Did Mrs. Henderson ever discuss HOA finances with you? No, never. She only talked to me about fines and violations. I had no involvement with the financial side of things. Detective Mills nodded and made some notes. "Did you ever observe her spending money in ways that seemed inconsistent with her known income?" I thought about it. "Well, she drove a new BMW and always wore expensive clothes, but I assumed she had money from somewhere else. I don't know what her husband does for work." "She's divorced. Has been for 3 years. She works part-time at a real estate office, and according to her tax returns, she makes about $35,000 a year. Yet she's been spending like she makes 6 figures. The pieces were clicking into place. The fancy car, the designer clothes, the expensive house at the end of the street. She'd been funding her lifestyle with HOA money. How did she hide it? I asked. She was the treasurer before becoming president, and she maintained control over the finances even after promoting Robert Foster to treasurer. She created fake invoices for community maintenance and repairs that never actually happened. The money went to accounts she controlled. Officer Crawford spoke up. "We're building a case against her, but it takes time to trace all the financial transactions. We wanted to let you know because you had significant conflicts with her, and we want to make sure you're not in any danger. Danger? You think she'd come after me? We don't know. But people facing serious criminal charges sometimes act irrationally. Just be aware and let us know if she contacts you or does anything suspicious. They gave me their contact information and left. I sat on my couch for a long time, processing this new information. Patricia hadn't just been a nightmare HOA president. She'd been a criminal. Over the next few weeks, the investigation intensified. Linda kept the neighborhood informed through regular emails. The audit had uncovered even more theft than initially reported. The total was over $60,000. Patricia had been stealing from all of us for years, and we'd been too focused on her annoying enforcement of petty rules to notice. In late July, Patricia was arrested. The police showed up at her house early one morning and led her out in handcuffs. Several neighbors watched from their windows, including me. I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and pity. She'd brought this on herself, but it was still sad to see someone's life fall apart like that. The criminal case moved through the system slowly. Patricia hired a lawyer and initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank records, fake invoices, testimony from contractors who'd never been paid by the HOA. It all pointed to systematic theft over multiple years. In October, she changed her plea to guilty as part of a deal with the prosecutors. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Since she'd already spent most of the money and didn't have significant assets, the HOA would likely never recover the full amount. But at least she was being held accountable. The neighborhood slowly recovered from the drama. Linda proved to be an excellent HOA president, fair and reasonable while still maintaining community standards. The bylaws were updated to include better financial oversight and transparency. No single person would ever have the kind of control Patricia had enjoyed. As for me, I finally felt at home in Pine Ridge. Without Patricia's constant harassment, I could actually enjoy living there. The mountain views were beautiful, my neighbors were friendly, and the HOA meetings were boring in the best possible way. I never did get a full apology from Patricia. The closest thing came in a letter her lawyer sent to the HOA as part of the restitution proceedings. It was a generic statement expressing remorse for her actions and acknowledging the harm she'd caused. It didn't specifically mention me or the snow shoveling incident, but I decided to take it as the closure I needed. Frank and I became good friends. We'd have coffee together sometimes and talk about the whole saga. He'd lived in Pine Ridge for 15 years and said he'd never seen anything like the Patricia Henderson situation. You know what the irony is? Frank said one morning as we sat on my porch watching the sunrise over the mountains. If she just left you alone about the snow shoveling, none of this might have come to light. You pushed back, which started the whole chain of events that led to her removal, which led to the audit, which exposed her crimes. He was right. If Patricia had shown even a little bit of flexibility and common sense, she might have gotten away with her embezzlement for years longer. But her need to control every aspect of the neighborhood, her obsessive enforcement of petty rules, and her personal vendetta against me had ultimately been her downfall. All I wanted to do was shovel my driveway before work, I said, shaking my head. $300 fine for using a snow shovel at 5:30 in the morning. It's insane. The best part was you letting the snow block them in, Frank said with a chuckle. That was brilliant, petty but brilliant. I'm not proud of that, I said, though I was smiling. Other people were affected, not just Patricia. True, but it made your point. And honestly, I think a lot of people understood why you did it. Patricia needed to learn that actions have consequences. She definitely learned that lesson. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our coffee and enjoying the morning. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. No one was rushing around trying to shovel snow or arguing about HOA violations. It was just a nice mountain community where people could live their lives without harassment. That winter, we got another big snowstorm. 22 inches fell overnight, and I woke up at 6 a.m. to start clearing my driveway. The amended bylaws now allowed snow removal starting at 6, which made a huge difference for people with early work schedules. As I shoveled, I saw other neighbors coming out to do the same. People waved and called out friendly greetings. Someone a few houses down was using a snowblower, and nobody complained about the noise. When the county plow finally came through and pushed snow across our access road, a group of neighbors organized quickly to clear it. I joined them, and we had the road passable within 2 hours. That's how a community is supposed to work. People helping each other, showing flexibility and understanding, not rigidly enforcing arbitrary rules for the sake of control. Linda sent out an email later that day thanking everyone who'd helped with the snow removal. She announced that the HOA had received a partial restitution payment from Patricia's seized assets and would be using the money to hire a professional snow removal service for the winter. Going forward, we wouldn't have to worry about the access road getting blocked. It was a practical solution that benefited everyone, the kind of thing Patricia never would have considered because it didn't give her personal power. I stayed in Pine Ridge for several more years. The neighborhood remained peaceful and well managed under Linda's leadership. The property values actually increased, contrary to Patricia's dire predictions. Turns out people like living in places where the HOA is reasonable and not run by someone on a power trip. I eventually moved to Denver for a new job opportunity, but I kept in touch with Frank and a few other neighbors. Whenever we talked, the conversation would inevitably turn to the Patricia Henderson saga. It had become neighborhood legend, the cautionary tale about what happens when HOA board members abuse their authority. The last I heard, Patricia served 3 years of her 4-year sentence and was released on parole. She moved out of state, and I never saw her again. I hope she learned something from the experience, but honestly, I doubt it. People like Patricia rarely change. They just find new situations where they can try to exert control over others. As for me, I learned some important lessons too. I learned to stand up for myself, even when it's uncomfortable. I learned that documentation is crucial when dealing with unreasonable people in positions of authority. And I learned that sometimes a little bit of petty resistance can be exactly what's needed to expose larger problems. The snow shoveling incident became a turning point, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. One $300 fine for clearing my driveway too early led to uncovering $60,000 in embezzlement and transforming our community's governance. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance have the biggest consequences. When I bought my next house in Denver, the first thing I did was read through the HOA bylaws carefully. I asked questions at the HOA meeting before making an offer. I talked to neighbors about how the board operated. I made sure I wasn't walking into another Patricia Henderson situation. The Denver HOA was fine, run by a retired accountant named George who took his responsibilities seriously, but didn't let the power go to his head. We never had any problems. It was boring and uneventful, which is exactly what an HOA should be. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm grateful for how it turned out, even though it was stressful and frustrating at the time. I made good friends, learned valuable lessons, and helped expose corruption that was harming everyone in the community. And I got a great story out of it that I've told at countless dinner parties. People are always amazed when I tell them about getting fined for shoveling snow too early, and their jaws drop when I get to the part about the embezzlement. It's the perfect example of why HOAs can be so problematic when the wrong people are in charge, but also why it's important for homeowners to stay engaged and hold their boards accountable. Frank retired a few years ago and moved to Arizona to be closer to his grandkids. Before he left Pine Ridge, we had one last coffee on my porch. He brought up the snow incident again, laughing about how it had started everything. "You know, Zachary, I've been thinking about this whole thing," he said. "Patricia was stealing from us for years. She was fining people left and right, making everyone's life miserable and getting rich off our HOA dues. But she was so focused on controlling people that she couldn't help herself. She had to fine you for that snow shoveling, even though it would have been smarter to leave you alone." Her need for control was her weakness, I agreed. "Exactly. And your refusal to be controlled was what exposed her. You're like the little boy who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. Everyone else was just putting up with her nonsense, but you said no. That took guts." "It took anger," I corrected with a laugh. "I was just mad about the fine." "Whatever it took, I'm glad you did it. This neighborhood is so much better now. Linda's done a great job, and we finally have transparency in the finances. All because you refused to accept an unjust fine for shoveling your driveway." We toasted with our coffee mugs, and I felt a sense of pride, not just in standing up to Patricia, but in being part of a community that had come together to make things better. That's what neighbors are supposed to do. Support each other, hold leaders accountable, and work together for the common good. The story of Patricia Henderson and the snow shoveling fine became something I carried with me. Whenever I faced an unjust situation at work or in my personal life, I'd remember that cold February morning when I'd refused to help clear the access road. I'd remember standing my ground against someone who abused their authority. And I'd remember that sometimes the right thing to do is to simply say no and let the chips fall where they may. Years later, I was at a community meeting in Denver when someone proposed a new rule that seemed unreasonable. It was about restricting the hours when people could use their garage doors because of the noise. I immediately thought of Patricia and the snow shoveling fine. I stood up and spoke against the proposed rule, pointing out that people needed to access their garages when their schedules required it, not when an arbitrary rule allowed it. I talked about the importance of balancing community standards with individual needs. Several other homeowners agreed with me, and the rule was voted down. After the meeting, a young woman came up to me and thanked me for speaking up. She worked night shifts as a nurse and would have been severely impacted by the garage door restriction. She'd been afraid to say anything because she was new to the neighborhood and didn't want to cause trouble. I told her about Pine Ridge and Patricia Henderson. I explained how staying silent in the face of unreasonable authority never makes things better. I encouraged her to stay engaged with the HOA and speak up when something didn't make sense. That's the real legacy of the snow shoveling incident. It taught me that individual homeowners have power when they stand up for themselves and demand accountability from their HOA boards. It taught me that documentation and following proper procedures can overcome even the most entrenched authority figures. And it taught me that sometimes refusing to comply with an unjust rule is exactly the right response. The fine that Patricia issued me for $300 ended up costing her everything. Her position, her reputation, her freedom, and years of her life in prison. All because she couldn't resist exerting control over someone who refused to be controlled. As for the snow, well, Colorado winters haven't gotten any easier. But now when I wake up to 2 feet of fresh powder, I shovel whenever I need to, secure in the knowledge that reasonable people understand that life doesn't conform to arbitrary schedules. And if someone tried to find me for shoveling too early again, I'd know exactly what to do. I'd document everything, follow the proper dispute procedures, and refuse to back down from unjust authority. Because that's what the Pine Ridge experience taught me. Stand your ground, demand accountability, and trust that the truth will eventually come to light. That's the story of how an HOA fined me for shoveling too early, how I stopped and let snow block their only way out, and how that single act of petty resistance exposed corruption and transformed an entire community. It's a story about power, accountability, and the importance of standing up for yourself even when it's uncomfortable. It's a story about how one person's refusal to accept injustice can create change that benefits everyone. And it all started with a snow shovel and a ridiculous $300 fine.